"If anyone objects to this marriage, speak now." And the cleaning lady stood up and what she said. The most anticipated moment of the ceremony had arrived at the luxurious banquet hall, the Willow Garden Hall in New York City. Hundreds of guests held their breath as the officiant asked the traditional question that almost never received an answer. That was when a woman in a blue uniform stood up, trembling at the back of the hall, raising her right hand as if she were in a courtroom. "I object!" she shouted, her voice echoing throughout the room. The silence was so deep, you could hear the sound of petals falling from the bride's bouquet. All eyes turned to that simple woman, about 50 years old, who had been cleaning the floor minutes before the ceremony began. "That bride abandoned a baby 30 years ago and never came back," continued the cleaning lady, tears streaming down her face. Natalie Harrington, the bride, turned pale instantly. Her shaky legs could barely support her, and it was only thanks to the strong arms of the groom, Julian Sterling, that she didn't collapse right there at the altar. "What are you saying?" Julian asked, looking back and forth between the bride and the woman in uniform. The cleaning lady, whom everyone knew only as Mrs. Connie, pulled a yellowed photograph from the pocket of her apron. In the image, she appeared much younger, smiling while holding a newborn baby in her arms. "My name is Connie Miller, and I'm the aunt who raised the child that this woman abandoned," she said, pointing directly at Natalie. Eleanor Harrington, the bride's mother, stood up furiously from the front row. "What nonsense is this? Get out of here immediately or I'll call security," she shouted, gesturing to the event's security guards. But Connie didn't back down. On the contrary, she walked a few steps towards the altar, holding the photograph firmly. "Oh, you can call whoever you want, but I'm going to tell the truth I've kept for 30 years, and she replied with determination. "I was working as a nurse's assistant at St. Jude's Medical Center when this young woman arrived there, pregnant and terrified." Murmurs began to fill the hall. Some guests pulled out their phones to record the scene. Others stood up to see better what was happening. The tension in the air was palpable. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to hit like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing, Natalie finally found her voice, but it came out shaky and low. I never had children. This woman is making it up," she said, but her whole body trembled in a way that contradicted her words. "Liar!" exclaimed Connie, moving even closer. "I recognized you by the birthmark on your neck, that crescent moon-shaped mark. It's exactly like my adopted daughter's." Involuntarily, Natalie raised her hand to her neck, covering precisely the spot the cleaning lady had mentioned. The gesture did not go unnoticed by Julian, who watched her with increasingly suspicious eyes. "Natalie, tell me this isn't true," Julian begged, holding the bride's shoulders and forcing her to look into his eyes. But Natalie looked away. She couldn't face him. Her hands trembled so much that the bouquet of white roses seemed to have a life of its own. "I swear I never—" she began to say, but was interrupted by her own sister. "Enough, Natalie," shouted Brooke, the bride's younger sister, also standing up from the front row. "I always knew you all were hiding something." The whispers, the conversations that stopped when I came near, that locked room in the west wing of the house that nobody could enter. "Brooke, you don't know what you're talking about," Eleanor tried to interrupt her younger daughter. "Yes, I do, Mum. For years I heard you two arguing about something that happened when Natalie was a teenager. Dad always said it was for the good of the family, and you always replied that keeping the secret came at a high price." Connie used the family commotion to pull out more documents she had kept with her. "Here are the hospital papers, the original birth certificate before it was altered, and the letters I wrote for 30 years, hoping the biological mother would show up," she said, spreading the documents over a nearby table. Mr. Richard Harrington, the bride's father and a well-known construction industry businessman, finally spoke up. He stood with the authority of someone who always solved problems with money. "How much do you want?" he asked directly to Connie. "Everyone has a price. Name your price to leave and forget this whole story." The entire hall was shocked by the coldness of the question. Even some close relatives of the Harrington family exchanged disapproving glances. "I'm not here for money, Mr. Richard," Connie replied with dignity. I'm here because my adopted daughter deserves to know the truth about her origins. For 30 years she's wondered why she was abandoned, if she did something wrong, if her biological mother didn't love her. Julian, who was a lawyer with a mind trained to analyze complex situations, realized this wasn't an extortion attempt. The woman was genuinely emotional, and her documents seemed authentic. "Natalie, we need to talk. Now," he said to the bride, with a firmness she had never heard before. "Julian, please, not now, not in front of everyone," Natalie pleaded. "Then when? After we're married? When I find out my wife hid something so important from me during all these years of our relationship?" At that moment, a young woman who had been attending to an elderly guest who had fallen ill approached the commotion. It was Vanessa Miller, a 29-year-old nurse who had been hired at the last minute to accompany some older guests during the ceremony. Connie saw her, and her face lit up as if she had seen an angel. "Vanessa, my daughter, what are you doing here?" she exclaimed, running to hug the young woman. "Aunt Connie, I was working, attending to the lady who fainted over there in the 3rd row," Vanessa replied, confused by the whole situation. "What's going on?" "The miracle I prayed for every day for 30 years has happened," Connie said, crying. "Your biological mother is here." Vanessa followed her adoptive aunt's gaze and saw Natalie at the altar, pale as a wall, dressed as a bride and trembling from head to toe. "What do you mean, Aunt? You said my mother had gone to another country and you never heard from her again." "I lied, my daughter. I lied to protect you from the pain, but now I see you had the right to know the truth all along." The reunion between Connie and Vanessa was so moving that several guests started crying along with them. It was impossible not to be touched by that genuine love between adoptive mother and daughter. Natalie watched the scene from afar, with tears streaming through the makeup that had taken hours to perfect. Seeing that beautiful, determined young woman stirred something very deep inside her. "She looks like me when I was that age," she murmured, almost to herself. "What did you say?" Julian asked, having heard the comment. "Nothing, Natalie tried to recover, but it was already too late. Eleanor Harrington realized the situation was spiraling completely out of control. 30 years of keeping that secret, only for it all to come out on her daughter's wedding day in front of 300 guests. "Okay," she shouted, making everyone stop to listen. "Okay, I'll tell the truth. Natalie got pregnant when she was 17. The hall erupted in murmurs and exclamations. It was the first time anyone in the family had confirmed the facts. "Eleanor, for heaven's sake," Richard tried to stop his wife from continuing. "No, Richard, enough lies. Enough carrying this weight. Our daughter was on an exchange program in Chicago, fell in love with a boy from a simple family, and got pregnant. When we found out, she was already 5 months along." Natalie looked as if she'd been struck by lightning. Hearing her mother tell her most intimate story to that crowd was like reliving the worst nightmare of her life. "Mom, please, stop," she begged. "I'm not stopping, Natalie. You deserve to let go of this burden. We forced the secret to protect your reputation and make sure you could marry well in the future. We were scared no man from a good family would want you if they found out you'd had a child." Julian felt like he'd been punched in the gut. In 3 years of their relationship, Natalie had never once mentioned anything about this. They'd talked about having children someday, about starting a family, and she'd never said she'd already been a mother. "Natalie had just given birth when Richard and I arrived at the hospital," Eleanor went on. "She was sedated, still recovering from labor. That's when we made the decision." "What decision?" asked Vanessa, listening with wide eyes. Richard took over the story, looking as if he'd aged 10 years in a few minutes. "We paid the hospital staff to forge the documents. We told Natalie the baby hadn't made it, that there were complications during birth." "You made her believe I died?" Vanessa asked, her voice heavy with pain. "It was best for everyone," Richard replied, but his voice no longer carried its usual authority. "Natalie was very young. She wasn't equipped to raise a child on her own. We couldn't take on that responsibility. We had our businesses, our reputation to uphold. So you gave me to my aunt." "Connie worked at the hospital and offered to adopt you," Eleanor explained. "She couldn't have children and always wanted to be a mum. It seemed like the perfect solution." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and hit like, and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us, who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Connie approached the Harrington family with a dignity that completely contrasted their wealth and extravagance. The perfect solution would have been to let the mother and daughter decide together what they wanted to do, she said firmly. You robbed Natalie of the right to choose, and you robbed Vanessa of the right to know her true origins. How could you do this to me? Natalie asked her parents, with a mix of anger and pain she'd held onto for decades. We thought it was for your own good, Eleanor tried to justify herself. You were so young, you had your whole life ahead of you. If you kept the baby, your life would have been ruined. My life was ruined anyway, Natalie burst out. Do you think I never missed it? That I never dreamed about that baby? That I never wondered what it would have been like if it had survived? Tears now streamed freely down the bride's face. The mask of perfection she'd worn her entire life was finally falling off. For years I went to therapy because I couldn't forgive myself for not saving my child. I thought I'd done something wrong, that I'd failed as a mother before I even became one. Julian heard that confession and felt his heart break. He finally understood why Natalie sometimes got melancholy for no apparent reason, why she hugged the family's children with an intensity that seemed desperate. Why did you never tell me? He asked, but there was no anger in his voice, only sadness. How was I supposed to tell you I'd had a child and that he'd... Natalie couldn't finish the sentence. But I didn't die, said Vanessa, stepping closer to the woman who had given birth to her. I grew up, graduated, became a nurse. I had a happy childhood with Mrs. Connie. For the first time since the confusion began, Natalie looked directly at Vanessa. What she saw left her breathless. It was like looking into a mirror of the past. The same green eyes, the same face shape. Even the way she tilted her head when focused was identical. You look so much like I did at your age, she said, reaching out a hand timidly. Vanessa hesitated for a few seconds, but then accepted the gesture. Their touch was like an electric current that everyone in the hall could feel. I always wanted to know where my passion for taking care of people came from, said Vanessa. Mrs. Connie told me my biological mother was very affectionate, but she never gave me more details. You became a nurse? Asked Natalie with genuine pride in her voice. Yes, I specialized in pediatrics. I love working with children. Natalie smiled for the first time since the confusion began. It was a smile full of tears, but also of a hope she hadn't felt in a long time. Your aunt took good care of you, she said, looking at Connie with gratitude. She's the best mother anyone could have, replied Vanessa. She taught me everything about honesty, hard work, and unconditional love. Richard, who had remained silent throughout that emotional exchange, finally spoke up. Connie, He tried to form a sentence, but the words wouldn't come out. You paid me a ridiculous amount to keep quiet and raise the girl, said Connie. $300 a month for 5 years, as if a child only cost that much. We can make it up to you now, Richard offered, falling into the same old mistake. I don't want your money. I never did. I wanted Vanessa because she needed a family, and I needed a daughter. It was love from the very first moment. The contrast between Connie's simple, genuine love and the cold calculation of the Harrington family was evident to everyone present. Julian, who had listened to everything in silence, finally made a decision. I need some time to process all this, he said, addressing Natalie. I can't get married today without knowing if I can fully trust you. Julian, please, Natalie pleaded. I never wanted to lie to you. I really thought that she wasn't here anymore. But you found out the truth at some point, didn't you? Your parents just confirmed you knew what they did. Natalie closed her eyes, knowing she could no longer escape the full truth. I found out when I turned 25. My grandmother, my father's mother, was very ill and called me in for a private conversation. She told me the truth, said she never agreed with what my parents did, but she didn't have the courage to intervene back then. And what did you do when you found out? I searched. For years I searched. But the records had been altered. The hospital staff who were part of the scheme had moved away or retired. It was like you had completely erased any trace, she said, looking at her parents with resentment. Eleanor lowered her head in shame. For the first time in 30 years, she was seeing the real consequences of her actions. I hired private detectives, scoured orphanages, hospitals, adoption records. I spent a fortune trying to find any clue, Natalie continued. And you never found anything. I once thought I was close. I found out that a nursing assistant had adopted a child around the same time, but when I got to the address, the house was empty. You had moved, she said, looking at Connie. We moved a few times when Vanessa was little, Connie confirmed. I wanted her to have better educational opportunities, so we went after the best public schools. I never stopped searching completely, Natalie admitted. Even when I met Julian, even when we decided to get married, there was always a part of me that hoped to one day find you, she said, looking at Vanessa. Why didn't you tell Julian about this? Because I was scared. Scared he'd think I was an unnatural mother for having let my daughter go. Scared he wouldn't want to marry me if he knew my story. Julian heard that confession and felt a mix of anger and understanding. On one hand, he understood Natalie's fear. On the other, it hurt to know she hadn't trusted him enough to share that pain. Natalie, you've known me for 3 years. Have I ever shown myself to be the kind of person who would judge you for something your parents forced you to do when you were 17? No, but you chose to carry that pain alone rather than trust me to help you. The accusation was gentle but pointed. Natalie realized that in her fear of losing Julian, she had almost lost him anyway. At that moment, an elderly woman of about 80 years old struggled to stand from a chair in the 5th row. It was Dorothy Sullivan, her grandmother's best friend from her father's side. I have something to say, she announced with a trembling but determined voice. Mrs. Dorothy, you don't need to get involved in this. Eleanor tried to discourage the older woman. Yes, I do, Eleanor. Martha made me promise I would tell the truth if I ever had the chance, she said, referring to Natalie's grandmother, who had passed away 5 years earlier. My grandmother? What does she have to do with this? Your grandmother suffered until her last day because of this secret. She told me that the family had forced an innocent child to grow up away from her biological mother, and that this was an injustice that stained the whole family. Dorothy pulled a letter from inside her purse. Martha wrote this letter shortly before she passed. She asked for it to be read only if the truth came to light. You destroyed the copy she left at home, but she gave me a second one. Mr. Richard paled at the sight of the letter. He had searched every corner of his mother's house after she passed, precisely to make sure no incriminating documents had been left behind. May I read it? Asked Dorothy. Everyone silently agreed, knowing that this letter could change the course of the entire situation. Dorothy adjusted her glasses and began to read. My dear children and grandchildren, if this letter is being read, it's because the truth has finally come to light. I have carried a weight on my conscience for 30 years, since the day Richard and Eleanor made a decision I could never accept. When I found out that Natalie was pregnant, my first reaction was to offer my full support. I was ready to help raise my great-granddaughter, to give all the love and support a family should give. But I was ignored. Richard, my son, I know you believed you were protecting Natalie, but you robbed her of the right to choose. You took away an innocent child's right to know her true family. All these years I could see the pain in Natalie's eyes, that melancholy she carried, the way she looked at small children with a longing she herself didn't fully understand. If the girl is alive and well, I hope she has found a family that truly loves her, and I hope that one day she and Natalie can reunite and heal the wounds we caused. With love and regret, Martha Harrington. The silence that followed the reading of the letter was absolute. There wasn't a sound in the hall, beyond the silent tears that practically everyone was shedding. Natalie cried so hard her shoulders trembled. Knowing that her grandmother had suffered for her sake for so many years was almost unbearable. Did Grandma try to find me? Asked Vanessa, breaking the silence. She tried, answered Dorothy. A few times she asked me to help her search for information about you, but Mr. Richard always found out and put a stop to the investigations. What do you mean? Asked Julian. I hired detectives to follow any lead my mother uncovered, admitted Richard, ashamed. When they got too close to the truth, I bribed them to stop the investigations. Connie lifted her head, finally understanding why she sometimes had the feeling of being followed when Vanessa was little. So you knew where we were the whole time? We knew the general area, but never the exact address. I wanted to make sure you were okay, but I didn't want Natalie to find out the truth. Up until today? Up until today. I never imagined you'd work at the same event as Natalie's wedding. It was astonishing how fate had conspired to make that meeting happen. Vanessa had only been hired the day before, when one of the original nurses had fallen ill. If it weren't for that coincidence, maybe the truth would never have come to light. "Aunt Connie, can I ask you a question?" said Natalie, addressing for the first time directly the woman who had raised her daughter. "Of course. Do you hate me?" The question caught Connie off guard. She looked at Natalie for a few seconds before answering. "I used to hate you," she said honestly. "For a long time I hated you for abandoning Vanessa, but after hearing your story today, I realize you were as much a victim as she was. Thank you for taking care of her. Thank you for giving her the love I couldn't give. It wasn't a sacrifice, it was a gift. Vanessa brought meaning to my life." The adoptive mother and daughter hugged again, showing a bond that 30 years of love and dedication had built. Julian, who had watched the whole exchange in silence, finally approached Natalie. "I need to know something," he said. "If you had told me the truth from the start, what would you have wanted me to do?" "What do you mean?" "If you had told me you had a daughter at 17, that your parents made you believe the child had passed away and that you spent years searching for her, what would you have expected from me?" Natalie thought for a few moments before answering. "I would have expected you to help me keep searching, that you would understand there would always be a part of me that belonged to her, and that if we ever found her, you would accept her as part of our family." "Then that's what I'm going to do," said Julian, surprising everyone. "What?" "Natalie, I love you with your story, with your pain, with your secrets. What your parents did was terrible, but you were a scared teenager. You had no choice. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Are you saying you still want to marry me after all this?" "I'm saying I want to marry you, especially after all this, because now I know you completely. There are no more secrets between us." "And Vanessa?" asked Natalie, looking at the daughter she had lost and found on the same day. "Vanessa is your daughter, and if she wants, she will be my stepdaughter. If she allows it, she will be part of our family." Everyone's eyes turned to Vanessa, who was clearly processing everything that had happened in the last few hours. "I need time," she said with maturity. "For 30 years I believed my biological mother didn't want me. Now I find out she was deceived, and that she actually searched for me for years. That's a lot of information to process at once." "Of course," said Natalie, trying to hide her disappointment. "I understand completely. But," Vanessa continued, "I'd like to get to know you better. I'd like to understand what your life was like when you were my age, what your dreams were, your fears. I'd like to build a relationship slowly." "I would love that too," Natalie replied, with tears of relief. "And I want to make it clear," Vanessa said, looking at Connie, "that you will always be my mother. The mother who raised me, who loved me, who taught me everything I know about life. Nothing will change that." "I know, my dear. And that's how it should be," Connie replied, proud of her adoptive daughter's maturity. "So," Julian said, looking around the hall filled with curious guests, "what do you think about turning this day into a celebration of a reunited family?" "What do you mean?" Natalie asked. "Let's get married right now, here, in front of everyone. But now with all the truth out in the open, with your daughter present, with Connie as part of the family. Let's start our life together the right way, without secrets." Natalie looked around the hall. The guests were clearly moved by the whole story. Some were openly crying, others were smiling tenderly. There was an atmosphere of redemption in the air that she had never experienced before. "Are you sure you want this?" she asked Julian. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Natalie then turned to Vanessa. "And you, would you like to be at my wedding?" Vanessa looked at Connie, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes," she said, smiling for the first time since all the confusion had started. "I would love to." The officiant, who had quietly witnessed the entire situation, finally spoke up. "Well, if everyone agrees, we can resume the ceremony. Perhaps it would be appropriate to take a short break so that those involved can get themselves sorted." Eleanor and Richard approached the group, clearly remorseful. "Natalie, Eleanor began. "Not now, Mom," Natalie interrupted. "Today is about starting a new phase of my life, about building a family based on truth and love. We'll talk about the past, but not today." "We understand," Richard said, "and we want you to know we're sorry, truly sorry." "Remorse is a first step," Connie said, "but actions speak louder than words. What would you like us to do?" "Treat Vanessa as the granddaughter she always was. Publicly acknowledge the mistake you made, and never try to control your children's lives with lies again." Richard and Eleanor agreed in silence, knowing they had a long road of redemption ahead. Over the next 20 minutes, there was a general reshuffling. Connie was invited to sit in the front row next to Natalie's parents. Vanessa was positioned as one of the improvised bridesmaids. Brooke, Natalie's sister, took on the role of event organizer, making sure everything went perfectly. When the ceremony resumed, there was a completely different energy in the air. It was no longer just a marriage of social convenience. It was the celebration of a family that had been reunited, of secrets that had finally come to light, of forgivenesses that were being built. Julian firmly held Natalie's hands as they repeated their vows. "Natalie," he said, improvising words that weren't in the original script, "I promise to love you with all your history, to accept your family as my family, and to build a future where we never have to keep secrets from each other again." "Julian," she replied, also improvising, "I promise to trust you completely, to share my pains and joys, and to build with you a family based on true love and honesty." When they kissed, sealing the union, the hall erupted in applause. But the most emotional moment happened shortly after, when Natalie turned to Vanessa. "I know I can't get back the 30 years we lost," she said, holding her daughter's hands. "But if you'll let me, I'd like to be here for the next 30, 40, 50 years of your life." "I'd like that too," Vanessa replied, and mother and daughter embraced for the second time that day, but now with the promise of a future together. The party that followed was unlike any wedding celebration those guests had ever witnessed. Instead of empty talk about business and social status, people spoke about family, forgiveness, second chances. Connie, who had arrived at the event as an employee, was now seated at the main table, wearing a dress borrowed from Natalie herself, treated as the matriarch she should always have been recognized as. During dinner, Julian gave a speech that moved everyone. "Today I married the woman I love, but more than that, I gained a family I never expected to have. I learned that the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than the most comfortable lies. And I learned that true love isn't afraid of anyone's past." Natalie also made a point to speak. "For 30 years I carried an emptiness in my chest that I didn't know how to fill. Today that emptiness was filled not only by reuniting with my daughter, but by discovering that she was raised by an extraordinary woman who gave her everything I couldn't give." She turned to Connie. "Connie, you're not just Vanessa's adoptive mother. You're the woman who saved my daughter from a family that, at the time, didn't know how to show love the right way. You're the hero of this story." Connie, who had never been publicly recognized for anything, cried with emotion upon hearing those words. Vanessa also wanted to speak. "I grew up wondering where my determination came from, my desire to take care of people, my strength to face challenges. Today I found out that these traits came from both the woman who raised me and the woman who gave birth to me. I'm lucky to have two extraordinary mothers." The night went on with conversations, dancing, and plenty of emotional tears. For the first time in decades, all generations of the family were gathered without masks, without secrets, without fear. Eleanor and Richard spent a good part of the party talking to Connie, trying to understand how she had raised Vanessa with so few financial resources, but with so much love. It was a lesson in humility they would never forget. Brooke, Natalie's sister, was fascinated to meet the niece she never knew she had. Vanessa, in turn, was curious to get to know the biological family she had always wondered about. Around midnight, Julian and Natalie were getting ready to leave for their honeymoon when Connie called them aside. "I have something for you," she said, pulling a small box from her purse. Inside the box was a baby bracelet, tiny and delicate. This bracelet was on Vanessa's wrist when she came to me. I kept it all these years, waiting for the day I could return it to her biological mother. Natalie held the bracelet with trembling hands. It was the first concrete thing she had of her newborn daughter. "Thank you," she said, unable to stop crying. "Thank you for keeping this. Thank you for keeping her." "Now you're a family," Connie said, "and family is the most important thing in the world." 3 months later, Julian and Natalie returned from their honeymoon in Europe to find a surprise waiting for them. Connie and Vanessa had moved to a house just 10 blocks from the Harrington family mansion. "We decided we want to be close," Vanessa explained, "so we can get to know each other better, to slowly build this family relationship." Natalie was too emotional to speak. It was more than she had ever dreamed of in her wildest dreams. Over the following months, the family dynamic gradually adjusted. Connie taught Natalie how to make Vanessa's favorite dishes. Vanessa told Natalie about her childhood, her fears, her dreams. Julian learned to be a stepfather to an independent and mature woman. Eleanor and Richard began a process of family therapy to learn how to deal with the consequences of their past actions. They discovered that being grandparents was far more rewarding than they had imagined, especially when based on honesty and mutual respect. The family decided to transform the room that had been kept locked in the mansion into a space for positive memories. They put up photos of Vanessa growing up, her diplomas, her achievements. It was a way to honor the lost years and celebrate the years to come. Connie, who had worked her entire life as a cleaner and nursing assistant, was invited by Richard to take on an administrative role in the family business. She gently declined, preferring to keep her independence, but accepted help to open her own small business, a school for elder caregivers. 6 months after the wedding, Natalie and Julian discovered they were expecting a baby. The news was met with joy by the whole family, especially by Vanessa, who was excited to be a big sister. "This time," said Natalie, her hands on her still small belly, "this baby is going to be raised by the entire family, with love, with truth, and with all the grandmothers she deserves." "Grandmothers, plural?" asked Julian. "Connie isn't just Vanessa's mother. She's the woman who saved my daughter when I couldn't. To me, she's as much family as anyone who carries our last name." Connie, who was present during this conversation, cried with emotion. After decades of being treated like an employee by the wealthy, she had finally found a family that valued her for what truly mattered, her capacity to love. The baby was born the following year, a beautiful girl who was named Faith. During the delivery, Natalie held Vanessa's hand on one side and Connie's on the other. It was a new generation coming into the world, but this time with the whole family present and united. On Faith's first birthday, the family organized a party in the garden of Connie's house. The simple home, but full of love, had become everyone's favorite gathering spot. There were no social pressures, no masks, just family being family. During the party, Dorothy, the friend of Grandma Martha, approached Natalie. "Your grandmother would be proud," said the elderly woman. "She always believed that one day the truth would prevail and that your family would reunite." "I miss her every day," replied Natalie. "I wish she could have met Vanessa, that she could have seen Faith born." "Who's to say she isn't watching it all from where she is?" said Dorothy, looking at the sky. That same evening, at home, Natalie found Julian in Faith's room watching their daughter sleep. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I'm thinking about how unpredictable life is. If that cleaner hadn't had the courage to stand up at our wedding, we would never have discovered the truth." "Connie isn't that cleaner," corrected Natalie with a smile. "She's the woman who saved our family." "You're right. And you know what? I'll never look at someone who works in general services the same way again. I'll never assume someone is less important just because their job is considered simple. Connie taught me that dignity doesn't come from what you do, but from how you do it. She cleaned floors for decades, but always with pride, always with purpose. And she raised an incredible daughter in the process. Our daughter, corrected Natalie. Vanessa is just as much our daughter as Faith is. The difference is that Vanessa was lucky enough to have two families who love her. 2 years later, Vanessa married a fellow doctor she had met at the hospital. The ceremony was small and intimate, held in the garden of Connie's home. Natalie and Connie walked together, escorting Vanessa to the altar, symbolizing the union of two families that had become one. During the wedding speech, Vanessa thanked her two extraordinary mothers. "One gave me life," she said, looking at Natalie. "The other taught me how to live it," she continued, looking at Connie. "And both showed me that true love overcomes any obstacle." Julian, who had become a devoted stepfather, also made a point to speak. "When I married Natalie, I gained not just a wife, but a daughter who taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing to love someone every day, about being there through the good times and the bad." Mr. Richard, who had changed a lot in recent years, approached Connie during the party. "Connie, I can never thank you enough for raising my granddaughter the way you did. Mr. Richard, you don't need to thank me for loving Vanessa. That was my privilege. But if you truly want to show gratitude, keep being the present grandfather you've become. I promise." And he kept that promise. Mr. Richard, who had once been a cold and calculating businessman, discovered that being a grandfather was far more rewarding than making money. He began to devote more time to family and less to business. Eleanor had also changed. The woman who had once forced her daughter to hide a pregnancy now helped Vanessa with preparations for her first child. She had learned that protecting family meant supporting it, not controlling it. 5 years after the turbulent wedding, the family had found a perfect balance. Natalie and Julian had 2 children, Faith and Leo. Vanessa was pregnant with her first child. Connie had become the matriarch, respected by everyone. Connie's caregiver school had become a benchmark in the city. She trained professionals who understood that caring for people was more than a job. It was a calling. At one of the school's graduations, Connie gave a speech that moved everyone present. "You've learned here not just caregiving techniques, but also about human dignity. Always remember that no matter what your job is, you can make a difference in people's lives. I was a cleaning lady for decades, but I always knew I was doing much more than cleaning. I was taking care of spaces where people lived, worked, and healed." Natalie, who was in the audience, cried when she heard those words. Connie had turned her pain into purpose, her humble work into a life mission. After the ceremony, biological mother and daughter talked in the school garden. "Connie, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Have you ever regretted keeping Vanessa? Have you ever thought about how your life would have been different if you hadn't taken on that responsibility?" Connie smiled before answering. "Natalie, Vanessa wasn't a responsibility I took on. She was the blessing I received. My life would have been empty without her. I would have just been a single woman working to get by. With her, I became a mother, a teacher, a role model. She gave me purpose. Thank you for seeing in her what I couldn't see back then. You were a scared kid. No one can blame a teenager for not knowing how to handle a situation that many adults wouldn't know how to face. Still, thank you." The 2 women hugged, as they often did now. It was a hug that represented forgiveness, gratitude, and a friendship born from the most unlikely circumstances. 10 years after the wedding that changed everything, the family had grown and spread out, but they remained close. Vanessa had 3 children, and Natalie and Julian had 4. Connie had become a great-grandmother and was glowing in her role. At a family gathering on Christmas, Faith, now 9 years old, asked an innocent question that touched everyone's heart. "Grandma Connie, why does Mommy always cry when you tell the story of how you found Aunt Vanessa?" Connie looked at Natalie, who nodded encouragingly. "Faith, your mommy cries because sometimes the most beautiful stories start with a lot of sadness. Your mommy and Aunt Vanessa were separated for a long time, but love always finds a way to bring together the people who love each other. Like in a princess story. Better than a princess story, my dear, because this story is real, and you are all part of it." The end. So, what did you think of this touching story? Did Connie make the right decision by standing up at that wedding? Tell us in the comments which part moved you the most, and if you have any family stories to share. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories.